Get all those Saturday morning kinks out. Good morning. Welcome to episode 266 of Hobby Hotline. I'm joined by John Newman and Dr. James Beckett from Sports Card Insights, legally pronounced. How's everybody doing?
Great.
Good. I haven't been on. It's been a bit since I've been on. I'll have to remember how to do this, but I think I'll figure it out.
I think it's like riding a bike, a very, very tiny bike.
You don't have any trouble talking, I don't think.
Right. I think that's a compliment from Dr. Well, I'm gonna take it that way. Anyway.
I think John's on today, and Dr. Beckett and I are riding in sidecar.
No, not at all.
We have some early good mornings. I always like to thank everybody who's wanting to get in. TJ online, good morning. Vintage card collector. We've got the all-star team. Well, we've got John and Dr. Beckett. I'm just running the board.
I'm an alternate.
Dr. Beckett is the mensch off the bench today. He's never off the bench, but he's definitely a mensch. Carlos, good morning. Philly Joe, good morning. Foul 5 ball. Gosh, great group today. Mad City Brew. And great team here ready for the 6-4-3 double play.
Takers to Evers the chance.
You're right. Well, they didn't like each other. You know, we need a double play combination that got along. Dr. Beckett, what position did you play?
I'm on first.
You're on first?
Actually, I played outfield, but lefty, so I would have played first base if I'd have been in the infield, but I preferred the outfield.
All right. John, you're probably going to take shortstop.
Yeah, in my younger days, I played short. And even in my younger days of softball, after hardball was over, I played short. But now moved over to third or first, depending on which team I'm on. So,
good morning, Doctor. Good morning, Laura. And Claim Cheap Shots. Oh, we got quite a Saturday morning. I do want to start off today on a topic that might catch one of our panelists off guard here a little bit. But John Newman did something I think is worth mentioning, and he actually visited the gravesite of Jefferson Burdick, who's one of the legends of the hobby, if not the absolute top of the Mount Rushmore. And I think we want to give John his due and have him tell a quick version of his story. But I also think we deserve to acknowledge who Jefferson Burdick was. And for people who don't know, just explain the impact. And if you're familiar with the Dewey Decimal System at the library, well, there's a hobby equivalent. But John, he's buried not too far from your hometown, so you paid a little visit.
Yeah, well, not my hometown's Brooklyn, but I'm in Syracuse, so he's buried 14 miles north of here. I did not realize that till recently. Now I know the story of Jefferson Burdick and his contributions to the hobby. I knew he was from here, but he had moved to New York City towards the end of his life with his collection at the Met. He actually even worked inside the Met, had a little corner. So I just made the assumption he was buried somewhere in New York. And recently I found out that he's buried in Central Square, New York. Like I said, 14 miles north. So I said, man, I like to pay my respects and honor the past and whatever, all those cliches, but they're true, at least for me. And so when I found out where he was, in turn, I'm like, I gotta pay my respects. It's close. So I went online. I kind of, it's a big cemetery, so you don't want to just be walking all through there looking for one headstone. So I found out, there's a site online called Find a Grave where you can find, where people are buried. Found out it was section 44. Now, some cemeteries don't label their section, so knowing the section, might not even help you. But fortunately, Hillside Memorial Cemetery, where he is, did label their section. So I was able to locate his headstone very quickly and, paid my respects. But, and obviously finding the headstone, it was hard to read. Like, he's between his parents, his dad to the left, his mom to the right. But his headstone they had lichen. I don't want to come across as like an environmental scientist here, but it's like a form of algae, just some dirt and grime, and it was very hard to read. And said my piece, went home, and even when I was driving home, I said, you know what? I got to do something about that. Like, I don't, if you know the Jefferson Burdick history, he was never married, didn't have any children. So I don't think there's any immediate family like tending to his gravesite. And so I said, it really weighed on my mind most of that Saturday. This was a Saturday. And I just, I made up my mind that I'm going to try to get back up there Sunday and clean off his headstone, and really went online. And you can do damage too, to if you don't use the right stuff. So sort of research how to do it the right way. Had all those. I somehow had all the materials, here, and even a little hand pump sprayer filled with water to sort of wash off the chemical, and I use toothpicks for the lettering. And I told my wife I'm going back up tomorrow morning, and she goes, "That's a very nice thing to do." And so, not that I needed her stamp of approval, but hearing her say that was really the final push to got up, took a shower, drove 14 miles, and spent about 70 minutes. And I did Jefferson Burdick's headstone, and then his parents were not as, for whatever reason, not as bad, but still needed look worse now that his was clean. So I did all three. I paid my respects in that fashion, and I posted about it because I know you guys know his contributions. I wanted to shine a light on someone. I think a lot of people, even not just new people in the hobby, I think even people who've been in the hobby a while still don't know kind of what he did for the hobby. And so with that post, and I know Sports Collectors Daily did they contacted me and asked if they could use my pictures and run an article about it. And I said yes, but make sure the focus is on Mr. Burdick, because that's who it's about. And and that was really my whole goal, is kind of to be a good steward, which I preach, right? And I want to put my money where my mouth is, number one, and number two, or number one really, is to highlight Jefferson Burdick. And it's 60 years since he's been gone. He passed away in 1963. And I think sometimes we don't, if someone doesn't talk about him, a person, they sort of fade from the limelight, and I don't think he should. And so I'm glad I've got 7 or 10 message Danny and Dr. Jim from people who, number one, said thank you for doing that. Number two, like, I didn't know about Jefferson Burdick, but reading that or seeing that made me look him up and what he did. And so if that's what comes out of this, that's beautiful, at least to me.
Well, I thought it was certainly very classy, and going back was above and beyond. So, with Dr. Beckett, I know you agree with me kind of on Jefferson Burdick's importance to the hobby. Could you comment on him a little bit?
A few things here. Number one, John, you are a mensch. I mean, that's what a mensch would do. So kudos to you to not just have the idea, but act on it. Who knew that there was a cemetery registry?
Yeah.
That you could find somebody. In fact, his grave was probably easier to find than some of the tables and booths at the National.
It was. I'm not gonna lie. It was, once you knew, like, they numbered their sections, so that was.
Well, but so did the National. They numbered it. So I think it's harder to find than you think. But one thing I was thinking is Jefferson Burdick. It's just, like you said, the hobby Mount Rushmore. It starts with him. But John, if you were on a cemetery tour, what's the second grave that you're going to go do of somebody in the industry, in the hobby, that has been an amazing contributor that's predeceased us. Mike Burkus was great, but he's
Yeah.
been gone.
Cyberger
Cyber.
comes to mind.
Burger hasn't been gone that long either. So
No.
of the guys of that Burdick was the guy that the older guys looked up to when I was coming into it. The Frank Nagy's of the world who were 20, 30, 40 years older than me. I guess 40 or 50 years older than me, but that's the guy they thought this guy really brought it together so that we could have some organization to our collecting. Because and the amazing thing that Burdick did, because almost everything I did was not based on that, but using that as a foundation. And I was just doing sports, and I had my hands full. The non-sports stuff, all the Americana and paper ephemera stuff that he did, he was prolific. It was his life. It was his life work, and he died doing it. And now he's being, now at least his grave is properly cleaned and honored, John. So thank you so much for doing that.
Well, I appreciate it. It just even that Saturday, like I said on my post, it just was weighing on my mind. Like it shouldn't be in that. I don't want to say maybe disrepair is too strong of a word. I mean, it's intact, but in that kind of condition where you could barely read it. And right on, a little backstory about the headstone that some may know or already, but some may not. When he died, this will kind of tell you his family situation, which was he didn't have a lot of family left. He was buried between his parents, and he didn't have. So he passed away in 1963, and finally, a family friend in 1997 purchased that headstone. So while he passed away in 63, that headstone wasn't placed on the site until 97. And so the headstone itself is 26 years old. And to me, it looked like no one had done any kind of upkeep in that time. And so I just knew I had to go back. And I've never cleaned. This is the first time I've ever even attempted to clean a headstone. So I didn't want to obviously deface it or ruin it or take a layer off with something I used that, even though I meant well, I did more harm than good. So I scoured the web from various sources to find what I can use. There is a product that's made specifically for that called D2. I don't want to make this Bill Nye the Science Guy show.
Are they now a sponsor of Sports Card Nation?
No, not yet. I'm working on. No, I'm just kidding. D2, which it's not a super expensive product. I will get it, and so for future, I'm going to try to get up there once a month to pay my respects. Just kind of keep a watch on it. I may not get when winter hits here. I may not get up there exactly every month, but hopefully at least every couple months. Once spring hits, I'll get up there every month. I have things I do in that area anyway, so I can kind of while I'm there, sort of oversee it. If someone else, I'm not anyone that sort of wants to help out, but I didn't think anyone else was doing it, so that's where the initiative came from.
Yeah, two more things, guys. One is I'm thought of as a price guide guy, I think, from back in the day, but it really was a cataloger too. And Jefferson Burdick is thought of as a cataloger guy, preeminent in that, but also he kind of did price guide. Now you think, well, that's very simplistic. In the American card catalog, cards were a nickel or a penny or a dime or a quarter. But that really is what they went for. And so when John is talking about cleaning up the grave and the headstone being problematic, Jefferson Burdick's his lifetime collection, accumulation of all these cards, would be worth millions and millions today. But if he had sold it back at that time, it would have been worth thousands, and maybe not even tens of thousands. Because even the Wagner and stuff like that, I don't know that his collection, that he could have gotten $10,000 for his collection when he died. So,
yeah, and he did do pricing, not in the same way you did, Dr. Jim, years later, but he did, and he was rumored to he would low value some things because he didn't like sort of the selling or the value put on the cards. He was sort of old school where he really thought we should just collect them and not worry about value. And so there he took criticism from some that like, hey, that should have been valued more in your catalog, in your publication. I'm sure you never got that at all during the Beckett days, Dr.
Well,
Jim.
people,
But
people are always going to criticize, but I've never heard anybody say that he was self-dealing or
yeah,
trying to. So the same dilemma I had to not be a dealer and not even really that much of a collector if you're doing these kind of activities. Now, he was still a collector, but nobody said he devalued something so he could acquire it, or he overvalued something so that he could get the best of a trade. So I think, like I said, he was a mensch too. He was somebody that
yeah.
really selflessly helped build this industry. Because the American
I
card catalog that he did, that wasn't a moneymaker. They're hard to find now. Of all the different editions, every 7 years or so, he'd do a new one. But that was, I promise you, that was a labor of love. There's no financial gain that he got. I don't know that he even broke even.
Dr.
yeah.
Jim, there's a question. I think you remember saying that Jefferson's collection was bigger in the past before the cards, quote, walked away after his death. Is that
They didn't walk away. And I actually have some ideas of who the people were that did it. But there were certain people that wanted to visit the Jefferson Burdick collection at the Met there, and it was not being supervised. And they'd go in there, and there's some things that were carried out, and that makes me really sad. Now, at that point, again, they weren't worth millions then, but they were, by the time that was happening, they were worth tens of thousands, especially the stuff from the 19th century and early 20th.
you talked
I
about him?
gotta
And now it's very supervised and very minimized. I mean, it's only some of it is available at some times. So I've been, and you just didn't have access to everything. So they've swung the pendulum back pretty far.
Talk about him being a cataloger. I mean, he literally put these in albums and stuck them in, taped them on the back. So, if we were worried about condition and value and all that, I mean, he was a true cataloger, and I think that's part of the pureness of his story.
Well, the other thing, see, he wouldn't have been able to afford plastic sheets. Spent all his money on the cards. Nothing was slabbed. Nothing was now.
Right.
But he wasn't going to put them in boxes. He wanted people to see them, and so I don't know if they were stamp hinged, but stamp hinges were so cheap in those days, and so it was like stamp collecting.
And he would photocopy the backs of his cards before he glued them into the album, knowing that the glue would damage the back. So he would have photocopies of pre-glue condition of his cards, knowing full well that the integrity of the back was going to be compromised with them being pasted. I got to ask Dr. Jim. I think I know the answer to this question, but I'd be remiss if I did. I know you'd be very young, being that he died in 1963. Did your paths ever cross with Mr. Burdick at all?
When I was in the 5th grade, no.
All right. I didn't think so, but
No, but I mean, I really think he didn't get out much. I mean, I really
Yeah.
think he was in really bad health. There weren't really card shows in those days. So almost all of it was by mail. I mean, I'm sure he had great friends that he never met,
Yeah.
from across the country. That's the way it was in those days.
Great one. I didn't know about his photocopying. That was a good tidbit. It's not like he could go to the Kinkos. So once again, you talk about the dedication to cataloging. That was a laborious process, to say the least.
Well, I'm sure the Met was doing that for him because I mean they would have copiers were expensive in those days. I bet they gave him access to theirs so that because he worked right there. They gave him a room off whatever in one of the research rooms to do that work, and he did it until he was on death's door.
It literally, wasn't it that he handed over the last one and said this will be the last one,
I won't be
and
back.
Yeah,
passed away
he
within,
said I
within a month or two.
2 weeks.
quoted line is I shan't be back, and he unfortunately lived up to that quote. He did not. He didn't die. I think it was a couple months later, but he was in the hospital for a bit until he succumbed to his illnesses and passed away. And that's where I assumed he was in New York. I assumed he had just been buried in New York, but they brought him back home to his hometown of Central Square, and he worked for the Syracuse paper. He was a writer for a year or two for what's called at the time was called the Syracuse Herald. It's now the Syracuse Herald Journal, and he worked at a company called Kraus Heinz, which is an electrical company, for 23 years of his life, and that's where he launched his publications and that. And Kraus Heinz, if you look out my window, it's 3 blocks that way. You can almost see it. So that's how close. I wasn't around yet, but this house was. Someone else was in it, but that's how close he was to me. So in a weird sort of way, I feel. I don't know how to describe it, sort of a kinship there, maybe because I'm here that close and even to where he's buried, which I found out. And that's what started this whole sort of ball rolling.
He would have been an amazing guy, even if he'd never done the thing at the Met. But
Yeah.
one of the unsung heroes in the story that I don't even know who it would be is the person that was on the other end of the phone or that he met with and said, I've got this huge collection of cards, baseball cards and other stuff, and I'd like to put them in your Metropolitan Museum of Art, along with the Rembrandts and the all these other fantastic old masters and things like that. And the person on the other end of the line at the Met didn't say you're nuts. What are you talking about? No one would be interested in that. So somebody had to have the vision that this was truly Americana, and that this guy, of all the people at that time, uh, was willing to do that. He basically donated his collection, which was preeminent. And so somebody had the foresight to say, yes, we want your collection here. And again, whoever handed it off then didn't take it seriously enough to protect it, but at least they welcomed it and allowed him to mount it and make it displayable. So here for that, for the Met to make
Yeah.
it, which is an awesome museum anyway. But it's like the Hall of Fame. There's so much stuff in the basement of the Met and of the Hall of Fame that they can't display everything.
Yeah, they rotate it. They rotate it out. I used to remember the gentleman's name. It'll come to me, or I can look it up from the Met. One of the deals of that, like you said, Dr. Jim, was that person whose name escapes me at the moment said, "We'll take the cards, but you have to catalog them all." And so that's where he went, and that's why he was working there. They brought his desk from Syracuse. He had his desk moved there, and he sat there and did that. Yeoman's work. It's 306,000 cards. I'm sure some of them may have been cataloged already, but not all of them. And that's what he got to work on doing. And they said that he picked up the pace as he got older because he knew internally like time was running out for him.
Real quick, I want to give a shout out to Rex at the Sports Card Shop, and he asked about the keeping them on the back, and yes, we touched on that. Yeah, he did glue them on the back into the binders or into the albums, and the great point it was that the backs were photocopied to keep them for posterity, and so just a really cool story. So went a little longer on that, but I think it was worthwhile. We're talking about our hobby hotline, and we wouldn't be here to some degree, and certainly not in the fashion we are without Jefferson Burdick. So I hope his grave marker started with a W. That's all I can say. That'd be fitting. Moving on, and Dr. Beckett, you mentioned that he didn't have card shows to go to. Well, we might have a lot of card shows to go to, and big one every year is the National. And we got some news this week that despite all the rumors that you can never have the National in the same city 2 years in a row, Chicago will be hosting for 2 years in a row. So it will be Cleveland, Chicago, Chicago. The vote went down to Atlantic City, Atlanta, and Chicago was the winner. The head of the leaders of the National said it was the most votes they've ever received from the most dealers. So I don't know, anything else behind that, but Chicago did win out. Atlantic City, my understanding was offering a pretty attractive package to the dealers. So interesting to see Chicago still win out. I really thought you couldn't have it there 2 years in a row. Dr. Beckett, am I wrong about that?
The bylaws were that you couldn't even have it in a contiguous state.
Huh.
To be another state. So that's why you jump over Indiana to get to Ohio with Cleveland. So either the bylaws were waived, or with the new regime, they got a waiver because. And then the second thing is the method of voting was changed this year, and again, that had to be approved as well. The voting was not by mail, but you could vote right there when you were there, and so that's why they had more people voting, because it was easier to vote.
Makes a lot more sense. John, if you were voting, where would you have voted? Atlanta, Atlantic City, or Chicago?
Well, I'll give you the politically correct answer. Well, Atlantic City for both of us, Danny, is drivable. So on a selfish point of view, I would have probably picked Atlantic City. I know it's other people's not favorite location. Atlanta, I've been to Atlanta, not for card purposes, but would have been interesting to have it in a different city that hasn't had it in a while. But, I knew from talking to people at the National, no one really gave Atlanta a chance. It was really between sort of Chicago and Atlantic City. But Chicago is really everyone's favorites, and I think it's as the dealer spoke, right? I think it's the dealer favorite, and that's why it won. And there's some who wouldn't mind if it was just there. We've heard the talk like, hey, it should be in Chicago every year, and maybe two nationals, Chicago and a rotating second location. Like, I don't want two nationals from my opinion, but I've heard that. I don't know if that's a real or someone just starting a rumor, but Chicago's a great town. I'll be there, or I'll try to be there, no matter what city it's in. I'd love to see it. It cost me more money, but I think even the West Coast should get the National back, whatever city they determine is the best fit that works for the West Coast. But I think too, with these regional shows, right, like Burbank's, that are I think it's sort of. I'm going to have a guest on the show here in 2 weeks that from that area that sets up at the National and says, I don't want it even here. I like to travel. We have the Burbank show. And so I think these big super regional shows are kind of moving in on those territories. Not that you can't have the National. The National is in a category of its own. But by the way, I just to mention the guy from the Met, that linked up that Burdick's collection. It was A. Hyatt Manor or Mayor, A. Hyatt Mayor, just to kind of give him proper credit as well.
And a very regal name, by the way.
Yeah.
Korean Cardboard, thank you for this was a point I was going to allude to. Bo showed a card show map, and about 95% of shows were east of the Mississippi, where most of the people are. Dr. Beckett, can you talk about the reality of just choosing a location for travel? And I know they look at populations within 200 miles or whatever the circumference is.
Well, it's a democratic vote of
Sure.
the voters that are eligible to vote.
Sure.
The voting is by dealers. And but I hear a lot of comments by collectors of saying it'd be really interesting if we had it in a different place. But the dealers are not looking to go someplace interesting. They're looking for a sure thing. And so when you say, hey, Atlanta might be, Atlanta wasn't that good last time, but it might be a lot better this time. Might be is not what the dealers are going to vote for. They know exactly what they're going to get in Chicago. They also know exactly what they're going to get in Atlantic City. And economically, other than the hassle factor and the safety factor, Atlantic City is it's a great building.
Yeah.
Not a great city, and it's got some problems there, but economically it would be strong. And so I was not surprised that Chicago was first. It is the surest of sure things. Atlantic City also would be viable, and Atlanta's a maybe at this point. And any other city other than Chicago is going to be measured up against a sure thing where this past year, I think most dealers did record sales. And so, do you want to try Denver? Do you want to even try Dallas? Do you want to even try anything? St. Louis, Detroit, any of these cities that have had nationals before or are considering it, Chicago is the surest of sure things.
It makes perfect sense, even though I'd love to see it come back to Baltimore.
This is not a tourist event. It's not a family vacation event, although it can be. But that's not what the voters are saying. Hey, it'd be nice if people would really like to go. No, let's have it at Disney World.
Well, put Orlando on the list.
Mickey Mouse cards are very hot.
But it's not a sure thing. It's not a sure thing for our industry. Even if, the consumer electronics, there's some huge show. Go to San Diego where the Comic-Con is. Nope, they're not going to go. They're going to go where there is such a base of collectors and such a track record of strong shows, and I think also and strong nationals that Chicago, if they really didn't have this restriction, that it really could be in Chicago every year because voters could keep voting for it. So
how long ago were the bylaws put together?
Long time ago. Bruce Painter was an attorney. He's passed away. He was another hobby icon that selflessly served the industry and prepared but I mean, he wasn't doing an edict. I mean, he prepared them and they were voted on and accepted, and he did a great job. And he was from Chicago, so it would have been to his interest. So they made it so you couldn't do 2 years in a row. They wanted to move it to a different place, but it started bouncing back and forth between Cleveland and Chicago. So yeah, go ahead.
I almost think we're at a point though, and no matter where they would put the event, I think people are going. I think people are going. Like even last year with Atlantic City, people say, "Oh man, it's my least favorite place for the National," but yet there was a ton of people there. I mean, they could probably put this in Alaska, and people would, boat over there and attend. Obviously,
No. You go to Alaska, would you even get 50,000 people compared to 100 and something? You won't, John. So several serious collectors will go no matter where it is. It could be in Tahiti. But if you want to, you need to make its commuting distance. It's not, you've got to be able to drive, and to drive from the East Coast to the West Coast is probably not going to happen for dealers. Collectors are going to jump on a plane. But they're not going to try something new for the sake of trying something new. They're going to look for a sure thing.
And I think people forget some of these dealers. I mean, you're talking about a truck and a massive amount of stuff that they're right. And I think people forget that this is not a Southwest flight for them. So it's a real thing. They have staff from the stores. A lot of times, if they have a retail store, they may have to close the retail store to do the show. I know a lot of retail stores have that issue. So, when they're voting, there's a lot more real life issues that come into play. Like Dr. Beckett said, not just what would be fun.
Mostly economics, though. I think,
Yeah.
it's not It's not, hey, there's some great restaurants there. That's a positive too. Chicago has it all. They have lots of hotel rooms within walking distance, lots of great restaurants within walking distance, and they've got the easiest in and out, or not the easiest, but an easy in and out for dealers, which is also a big deal. And the air conditioning will get fixed by next year.
Right. I
Or
was
the
about
year
to say
after. They've got 2 years to get ready, right?
it was a very it's a hot show coming up.
Yeah.
So Cleveland though, and, and I don't think I've been to a Cleveland National actually. I've heard that that's a fantastic building.
It's a World War II bunker,
Is
so
it really?
it's really solidly built. It's many floors, but you're mainly on the ground level. The ceilings are really high. There's lots of natural light that comes in. It's rectangular, which you guys didn't like my baseball field analogy, but it was hard to find things in Chicago. It won't be in Cleveland. It'll be a rectangle. I don't know if they'll put the corporates around the perimeter or in the middle, but it'll be well organized and easy to find, and that's a positive. But again, even that doesn't matter as much as how much money am I going to make if I'm a dealer.
Well, it'll be interesting if Cleveland sets a record, like John said. If the interest is so high that a reasonable show in a reasonable city, could pull another record, what that would mean for the future votes. Because, like,
I don't think it will, because I don't think they can have as many booths. They can get
really,
people in there, but I think people. I think the groundswell for Chicago was that, oh my goodness, I've been thinking about going to a national. This one's 200,000 square feet bigger than the one before. I got to go to that. Now, Cleveland is going to be, it's going to be less. It's going to be less. And, people like quantity and quality.
it'll be.
I had a question for Dr. Jim. You went to every national. If it can only be in one venue that you've been to, and you've been to them all, would it be Chicago? And if it is Chicago, what would be your second choice?
My first choice would be Dallas.
All right.
But that's not going to happen. And I've talked to Kyle about some of these issues and his the success that he's had. And it's like Rob Veras with Burbank. They're doing fine with their super strong regional show. They're doing so. Chicago is the easy choice. So I'm doing my regular shows every 2 or 3 months here in Dallas, and that's that scratches an itch. And going the national is awesome. And then I'll probably pick out one other thing to do each year, just as another way to connect.
And don't forget the synagogue shows.
I'm a regular there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. On a slightly different front, John, did you have anything else to add? I didn't want to cut you off there.
No, I mean, listen, for me, I'm going to try to get to every one, God willing, no matter where they have it. So Atlantic City's nice because I could drive. Cleveland's nice because next year I could drive. Cleveland, I didn't even realize this till I kind of punched in the MapQuest numbers. Cleveland is closer to me than Atlantic City is. I would have thought the other way around. Atlantic City is like 5 hours and 20 minutes, and Cleveland's 5 hours and 5 minutes, at least according to MapQuest. I guess it depends how fast I want to drive, but at least on paper, it's 5 hours and 5 minutes away. So I didn't think so. And I'm looking forward to Cleveland. I've never been to Cleveland, period, let alone to the National. And I'm going to go a day early, and I'm a big music guy, so the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and knock that one off my list of places I've never been to. So,
guys, one more thing I was just realizing, and that is that apparently Joe and Brian and Jimmy had to get special dispensation to waive the bylaw for being in the same location twice, to be not having to abide by the bylaws, because if that would not have been the case, it would have been between Atlantic City and Atlanta, and there might have been a little bit of a mutiny
Huh.
because there is so much anti-Atlantic City sentiment, which I think and I think Atlantic Cities would do their best. As Joe explained, they've addressed all these concerns. They're going to give a rebate. They're going to have a uniformed police people in a perimeter around the convention center. But I think there would have been a real uproar if the choice would have been between Atlanta, again, not the best national history there, or Atlantic City, which people have done well financially, but they've been nervous about walking back to their hotel room. Across, if you have to walk a few blocks in town, you don't want to make a wrong turn in Atlantic City. But that was supposedly addressed. But if Chicago had not been included, if it had only been two choices, Atlantic City might have won, but there might have been a little bit of a mutiny.
Very interesting. So they did need to get a special dispensation
So I
on the
think that was wise because they want to get going and they want to do a great job. And I think they're going to innovate in some other ways other than just location. Location is one of the innovations, but the dealers don't want the innovation of let's go to a new location and see how we do. No, they want to go to some place and have a sure thing, and then add on some innovations to make us more money.
Well, that's interesting. So it'll be. I wonder if the bylaws are going to be changed. I have no idea what the process is for changing the bylaws, but
well, it's any bylaws they have to be changed by the people that did the original bylaws, which is the voters. It's a democratic vote, but it probably takes a 2/3 majority to amend something to amend the bylaws, because all bylaws have provisions for how they're amended.
yeah.
And so, but again, but there's also like an executive committee. There's the committee, and I think they have some ability to do this stuff. It's not just the bylaws.
Mookie wants John to clean Cy Young's grave on his way to Cleveland.
I got a feeling that one is probably well kept by either
John,
cemetery staff or people visiting in droves.
You have a new calling in the hobby now. Anytime you take a road trip, you have to go to that website and look for people.
Well, listen, I would do it if I'm in the area. I would gladly do it.
Listen, I wouldn't make fun if it wasn't a good deed. So, all right, let's just catching up on a couple here. Getting back to all of our dream locations. John Keating had a good time in Atlantic City. I think if you didn't have a security concern, you didn't need Wi-Fi. It was great.
Well, for me, last year, my wife made the trip and she went to the beaches, and I went to obviously the card show, and it was a good time had by all. I will say this again from a selfish point of view, full transparent. When my wife makes the trip, that trip and the finances come out of our joint account. When I go solo, like this past year in Chicago, that comes out of my account. So from a save money point of view, more money for cards, I like Atlantic City because my wife will go.
So you're bringing your wife along to split the internal expenses so you can buy more cards.
Yeah, well, I mean it's just an agreed.
Save that for Valentine's, John. Save that for Valentine's Day.
It's probably a Hallmark card in there somewhere.
Yeah. This spiral quickly. All right, let's try to bring it home here with the hobby in the courtroom again, and this time we're wrestling in the courtroom a little bit. I know it's a pun of a title and it's an annoying topic, but it's going to have an impact on a lot of collectors, and I think that's the thing for those people who love WWE and UFC cards. There's a lawsuit going on, and it's going to stop the cards. And John, I know you know this better than I do. What's going on?
Well, much like the NFLPA did last month, WWE has announced that effective immediately, they want Panini to cease and stop printing and selling WWE cards. Now, there's 2 years, much like the NFLPA. There's also 2 years left on that original contract, but WWE said they didn't go into details, but they said that Panini did things to breach that contract, which led to this decision. Panini has fired back with filing a federal lawsuit in New York courts to block that, and so that's really where we're at. I just think it's just interesting the timing of this, and like I'm going to mention on an upcoming show. If you think this is coincidence, I my personal opinion, it's not. I think there is someone pulling strings behind the scenes, and in that same breath, wrestling said effective immediately, Fanatics will get our WWE licensing. So they're the common denominator here, and I just think things. Again, I don't have any inside information, but I just think there's things going on. There's phone calls being made, like do this so we can do this sooner, and that's where we're at. So, Paul Lesko, this is the World Series, as he said when he was on the show. He loves this stuff. I think I speak for most people when I say it's. I don't love it as much as Paul Lesko. I get it. That's his profession. It's not mine. So it's just a bad look, and they're going to get it eventually, but it looks like they want it sooner rather than waiting. So we'll see how this plays out. This is just another. I think Paul Lesko said there's 20 court-related hobby cases on the dockets, and now add another one, whatever that. Feel like Jerry Lewis. What's the Tiffany? What are we up to in court cases? So that's where we're at. So. And Panini with the football one has still released football products, and so I guess it's going to be up to courts and judges to rule that. And again, I hate these stories, but they are part of the hobby, and sometimes we have to cover them and talk about them. What lengths we talk about them? Yeah, sure, I get that, but we do have to talk about them because it does affect. If you're a WWE, I'm not personally, but if you're a WWE or UFC collector, this is even bigger news to
I
you.
just wanted to add one thing in the background that I left out by accident was WWE and UFC actually merged on a corporate
Yeah.
level within the last couple of weeks, and I believe it's now a TKO is the name of their corporate entity. So I I don't believe in coincidences on timing. It sounds like this is part of their to-do list after the merger between those. Um, I think there is a real impact for people who collect these cards, and it's a growing sport in the hobby. It's one of the few areas over the last couple of years that's seen a little bit of a roller coaster, but it is a growing area, and I know this is going to affect a lot of people because they're talking about pulling cards immediately. Now, I don't know what that means for how quickly there will be other cards, but it's and Logan has a good question. Is the NBA license the next domino to fall from Panini? Well, that's already gone. It's just a matter of time, is my understanding. Will it fall sooner? I think has to do with some of these lawsuits. Dr. Beckett, I was a big fan of the show Night Court. How about you?
I was a full-time expert witness for 6 years. So I was in court more than most attorneys. And any lawsuit is kind of a bad lawsuit. It means people couldn't resolve their differences. And so with the first shot off the bow being cease and desist by virtue of here's a lawsuit instead of, so I had to make some notes because there's so many things going on here, just as y'all were talking about. I'm shocked that there's the Panini hatred, some of the haters out there are so down on Panini that they're They're having no sympathy for the fact that this is a hobby company that's done a lot of good things, uh, and they're being pummeled now by a series of kind of adversaries. And as John said, there seems to be a kind of little bit of a Panini fanatics benefit to each of these. I'm not saying it's an orchestrated thing, but there do seem to be a lot of blows coming toward Panini, and I haven't heard a lot of sympathy from collectors. Hey, give them a break. Um, they it's really tough to run a company. Number one, when you've lost a lot of your key people this year, and number two, when you've been hit with multiple lawsuits, including one that you settled for 25 million, which I did talk to one of the guys and I understand that a little bit better, but that's still pretty mind-boggling. They grew the industry. Speaking of basketball, they probably grew basketball 10x during the last few years. That's what Fanatics aspires to do. Panini actually did it, but they're considered to be incompetent in the lawsuit, even though they did a 10x. And they did it with these same employees that Fanatics hired away, who are now not incompetent because they're with them. So I just think, and Panini here is considered an underdog when internationally they're more than $1 billion company, and they're just being pummeled. And so I just hope cooler heads will prevail. They're already, you know, on borrowed time and lame ducks. But when I look at some of the things that WWE said that they didn't do this, didn't do that. Again, in every contract like that, there's cure provisions that you give them a warning, and if you don't do it, and I'm not seeing any of that. And for hey, pay up your royalties, but you can't distribute even when you have. So that's posturing. But how do you settle this? How do you settle it? Because
Yeah,
they want
go
them
ahead.
out, and they want them out immediately. And as Mookie was saying, Mookie Chilson, all these things are bad for our industry because they affect the momentum that we have going. Yeah. And
The
Panini,
other thing too,
yeah, go ahead.
the WWE Panini owes WWE $5.6 million. So WWE saying stop making our cards right now, 2 years shorter on your contract, and pay us the full amount of the contract. And I hear that and I'm like, you can't have your cake and eat it too.
Well, they're not going to win that, but that's just scare language. That's so you can make it look like the lawsuit is substantial. That they're going to pay 2 years worth of royalties when they don't even get to do anything. So that's, to me, it's not crazy. But it doesn't seem fair. Everybody has their view of fairness. Let Panini do their stuff, and then when their contract runs out, it runs out.
Well, there's obviously, they always say, chase the money, and I think on this one, it's if there's something going on, obviously, you think the motivation is not the quality of the cards, but financial. Rex says, I have a hard time accepting the termination of an existing licensee contract based on a change of management when that change was was an orchestrated move by the new licensee. I think that's what Dr. Beckett was touching on, is that a lot of the management that's gone was the same people who were at Panini, not Fanatics.
But Danny, I'm expressly not willing to say that it's an orchestrated move, because that would be legally liable, I think. And so I've said, when there's a conspiracy, some conspiracies are symphonic, where everybody's playing off the same music and harmoniously working toward making beautiful music together. But most conspiracies are like jazz, where you follow the lead, somebody does something, then you do something because you see, and you kind of join in. But there's no music that you're reading. You're just playing along. And that's what I think is happening here. They didn't get together and say, hey, let's run them out of the industry. But when they're they're shooting arrows, and it's the wounded. I mean, Panini was a giant. They weren't a smaller company. They're way bigger than Upper Deck. So they're just getting wounded with these, and they're piling on. That just doesn't seem fair to me.
Well, I'm going to read this comment from Rex, and this is Rex saying this. 18 employees resign on the same day with no notice. That seems orchestrated to me.
It was not orchestrated in one sense, in the sense that at that point on that same day, all those employees were in the same place, and they had a chance to have meetings with fanatics and to hear their presentation one by one. And did the Panini guys say, "Hey, well, what are you thinking?" I think they probably did. They're allowed to do that.
Yep.
Okay, but the orchestrated would be, we're not taking any of you unless all of you come. No, they had jobs open, and this was at an industry event, and they said, we have jobs opening. If you would be a preferred candidate because you've already been doing this exact job. Yeah, so I'm not willing to go with orchestrated as much as it was business. Is trying to win at business. I've got these job openings. Somebody knocks on the door, say, "Hey, can I interview for the job?"
Sure.
They can.
All right. Well, moving out of the courtroom and wrapping up today, I want to finish up with maybe a little tribute here to Jefferson Burdick. I think, John, you actually acquired something that I'm going to ask you to share, which I think is very cool, and then I'm going to share something not nearly as cool.
I got this a few weeks back. It's from that collection of his that was at the Met. I don't know the provenance or how it's not there anymore. You can see, we talk about him being pasted. If you look at the back of this particular card, you can see where it was glued down and damaged the back. You won't be able to see it on the camera. If you had magnification, there is two stamps. One is right here, and one is right there that says from the Burdick collection at the New York Metropolitan Museum. Naked eye, you can't see. You got to put it under magnification. It's I believe, an 1890 honest long cut card. I know the lady depicted on this card is an actress. I do not know her name. Her name does not appear, at least on the front part of the card. So if anyone happens to know, I even tried to find out without too much success. But so it's an 1890, and it's from Jefferson Burdick's personal collection that was at the Met. So it sits on my desk as a reminder, to be thankful for what he did for the hobby, and having a small piece, a very small piece of that. So it's just kind of cool. And I'm in the history, not even just in hobby, but just in general. So even more so now with what I do in my regular job. So it's just a cool piece of history. And then you add on that it's a hobby history, even more better.
I was watching MLB Network this week, and this graphic came up on the screen, and I wanted to jump over here. Ronald Acuna joined a list of players with 200 hits, 140 runs, 100 RBIs, 50 stolen bases in a single season. Now, while I'd love to show you my Ty Cobb, I can show you my Huey Jennings. And, I never thought this card would ever be relevant other than I love it, but it's a W515-2, and that designation would have come from Jefferson Burdick, and that tied into me. I thought it was cool to see this graphic and tie in my card, and then when John went up there, I thought, listen, it's a perfect time to explain. Like I said, the hobby's Dewey Decimal System, as I call it, the way to organize and catalog. So we'll wrap it up with that. You guys got anything on your hobby weekend, Dr. Beckett?
I'm going to go out and buy some Huey Jennings cards.
There you go. He was a better player than he was an attractive man. I'll tell you that. John, what's on your hobby weekend?
Well, let's. My wife had hip replacement surgery, so I'm doing a lot of to-dos, making sure she's got everything she needs. She's doing okay, getting a little bit more mobile, which their physical therapists want her to get around. And if you're not Jefferson Burdick out by now, the Monday hobby quick hits will be a Legends of the Hobby series, which I do about every 3 to 4 months. And I just figured probably the time to do the Jefferson Burdick one, since he was already one on my list. So that'll be Monday as far as programming goes. Other than that, I'll be doing honey-do list things as my wife recovers.
Well, as I call it, the cantaloupe list, and that's what I'll be on. So to everybody, thanks for joining us on episode 266. Every Saturday morning, you can 11 a.m. Eastern on Bench Clear, and the first Tuesday of every month on Hobby Hotline. Guys, thanks for joining me. Say goodbye. See ya.
Thank you. It was fun.